So after I'd been in practice for a couple of years, one time flipping through a medical journal, I came across this phrase, narrative medicine. And I had no idea what it meant, but I knew whatever it was, this is what I was called to do. I learned that narrative medicine is clinical practice that's marked by narrative competence. So it's working as a physician with a solid understanding of what story is. If you learn about story, either through reading or writing yourself, you start to notice in patient stories that there's, the cast of characters, recurring themes, symbolism, there's meaning in the chronology of events as patients tell them to you. If you are open to noticing those things in patient stories, it allows you to understand the patient on a much deeper level and then provide better, more holistic care to that patient. I started writing for a number of reasons, and I was writing already before I heard what narrative medicine was and before anyone told me that writing makes you a better doctor. So initially I wrote just to capture things that were memorable at the clinic, and each day was so interesting, and there was so much that was beautiful or funny or moving. Then I started writing things down to try to sort through the things at the clinic that I found difficult. So, for example, the disparity in wealth between the refugee patients and those of us who worked at the clinic. Hearing stories of how horribly humans around the world treat each other. And sometimes it would be kind of a boundary issue. A patient invited me to their birthday party, and then I was trying to figure out, as a physician, should I go or not? I was at a narrative medicine conference a couple of years ago, and American physician writer Louise Aronson said that physicians ought to write. And she advocated that physicians write to memorialize their patients, to reflect on the work of doctoring, and to advocate for what their patients need. And that really struck me. I learned that narrative medicine is more than simply listening to the patient's story. That act of bearing witness also serves the function of legitimizing the patient's suffering. And in a similar way, writing patient stories down also legitimizes their experiences. It's interesting because these days, there's a lot of talk about cultural appropriation. And I did wonder when I wrote this book, should I be speaking for refugees? There's a poster I've seen that says something like, "Don't be a voice for the voiceless, just pass the mic." But refugees, because they are a marginalized voice, they don't have the same voice or advantages that I do. And there's the language barrier. 80% of my patients didn't speak English. The fact that virtually all of my patients had faced persecution of some kind, and it was typically for speaking out. Refugees generally aren't in a position to write this book. They are voiceless. As a physician, I see one patient at a time in my exam room. And as a writer, it's one reader at a time who's reading those words. And so I see both professions as similar in that way, in the intimacy on the importance of the physician or writer's voice, and that both professions really at their core are working to affect change in the patient or reader.